Welcome to the Conquer Your Battlefield podcast, where we come together to discuss some of the more significant struggles and metaphorical battlefields that we've faced along our journeys and share some insight on how we've conquered them. I'm JD McGibney, and today I'll be chatting with an extremely inspiring, vibrant, and courageous woman. She started off her journey in life as a radio and television host across the United States from Boston to LA to Miami. More recently, she has shifted gears and become an active voice in the mental health community as a certified mindfulness coach. Today, I'll be chatting with the ever so wonderful Melissa Maxx. How are you doing today, Melissa?
Hi, JD. How are you?
I'm doing really well. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you for asking me. I'm happy to be here. Always happy to talk about mental health. I think everyone should talk about it.
Agreed. And today, we're going to be talking about mindfulness. For those who are not aware, mindfulness is a mental state achieved by focusing one's awareness on the present moment while calmly acknowledging and accepting one's feelings, thoughts, and bodily sensations. Mindfulness is a therapeutic technique used by mental health professionals to help individuals better handle their stress and is commonly used to aid those struggling with anxiety and depression. A popular way that people are encouraged to practice mindfulness is through meditation. Melissa, a few years ago, you were diagnosed with an autoimmune disease that left you with physical and mental hurdles to overcome, and then shortly thereafter, were struck with the untimely passing of your brother. You were faced with a lot of heavy burdens in pretty quick succession, but were able to find your way out of the darkness through the study and practice of mindfulness. How is it that you came across this practice, and how has it helped you maintain a healthy level of control over your emotions?
That's a great question. That last sentence there, how has it helped me maintain control? The practice of mindfulness, which we'll get into a little deeper as we go on, is actually about letting go of control and realizing you don't have control. And you find control in surrendering to the knowledge that you don't have control. And you're no longer resisting life. You realize life happens and you may like it, you may not like it, but you are accepting life on life's terms. So control and mindfulness are very, the two words are very interesting. They play into each other. As far as how I learned about mindfulness, I had been studying people like Eckhart Tolle and Wayne Dyer and Jung and all the thinkers for decades. And while everything sort of intellectually made sense to me, I was having a hard time carrying it over into my everyday life and actually practice walking the walk. I could read the talk, but I couldn't really implement those things. Thankfully, once I got sick, I started having to look at how I became sick, and that became a lesson in the mind-body experience. And I realized that I had been living mindlessly for my entire life. I hadn't been thinking about the food I ate. I hadn't been thinking about the hours I kept, the friends I kept. I hadn't been thinking about the inner monologue I was having. Everything was mindless. I was just on autopilot and I was just a victim of life. So you would think when two really, and COVID, when three really big things strike in close succession, you would feel like an ultimate victim. But thankfully, through learning about mindfulness and eventually being able to implement, I was able to feel more in control about being out of control, if that makes any sense whatsoever.
It totally does make sense. And that's I think it's a really good point that you're bringing up, is the sense of not actually being in control. And speaking from personal experience, mindfulness has also been very helpful in my life and helping me kind of just like reorient myself. But that idea of letting go control, I think, is really important, because there's this sense of like when we're like really deep in like when we're really deep in like an anxiety fueled like spell, like we just want control. We want data. We want information. And we kind of just keep going around in a circle, and like it just keeps getting worse and worse because we don't have that control. And that idea of being able to go, oh, I don't have control over A, B, and C, so I shouldn't worry about A, B, and C, but I do have control over X, Y, and Z. So I will just focus on being able to control those things. And they do relate, but like that idea of being able to let go of the idea of trying to control things we can't and controlling the things that we do. Like you said, you weren't being mindful of the food you were eating. You have the ability to control that. So it's like, all right, I'm not going to eat ice cream, 4 times a day. I'm going to have some more vegetables.
Maybe, but yeah.
All right, once a day.
All right,
maybe twice on your birthday.
For breakfast, but
Listen, if you put some like eggs or like bacon on top, it counts as breakfast.
Oh, so
okay, you know what? Wait. You can totally put ice cream on top of waffles. That's a breakfast
that
food.
is true. Or pancakes.
You know what?
I mean, look at IHOP. Yeah, we just
we found a workaround. You can totally have ice cream multiple times.
We just reinvented the food pyramid, which turns out was totally wrong the whole time anyway. So.
Yeah, ice cream's always on top.
It's funny, you were talking about rumination and control, and there's a couple of important things there. When you're ruminating, there's like normal rumination, and then there's sort of chemical imbalance rumination. If you are diagnosed with clinical depression or anxiety disorder, which I was, not only are you not cognizant of the fact that you can, in theory, control that spin cycle, but oftentimes you actually physically can't control that spin cycle. And there's all kinds of chemical stuff going on. When you worry about something, there's a neural pathway formed in your brain. And the more you worry about it, the deeper, it's like a tunnel, the deeper the pathway gets, and it just keeps getting reinforced. So mindfulness alone, I don't want people to think it's like an easy button, because it's not. If there are underlying things going on, then you need to see the right medical doctors to sort of get that under control. But then by practicing mindfulness and realizing what you eventually can, you can be on the best medicine and still worry all the time because it's a habit. You can be on the best medicine and then be mindful of the fact that you can control what your brain is doing. And that's where the magic happens.
It's all about figuring out what works for you specifically. And I think, that's something that a lot of people don't really quite understand. It's like everyone's an individual. So sometimes you have things that can be cured with just going to see a therapist. And sometimes it takes, some medication. It, again, all depends on the individual. And the idea and like the idea of just going to a professional, like going to a therapist, going to a psychiatrist, it's like, it should be encouraged across the board for everyone, in my opinion, just because it helps. Sometimes you just need that clinical perspective, because there's only so much you can do as an individual, because you're biased living with yourself. And then your friends, family, and loved ones, as much as they love you and want to support you, they also have a bias and may not necessarily have the proper training to help you in that specific thing that you're struggling with.
It's funny, I was doing a written interview right before I sat down to do this, and I was just talking about this. And I said, I firmly believe that every human on the planet should be seeing a therapist or a coach or some kind of mental health professional. There's not one person who could not benefit from it. And when I was growing up, there was a big stigma around it. I am very, very pleased with the way the tide is turning, and kids are not only able to, but encouraged to express their feelings. And it's not taboo anymore. And it's getting more and more in the mainstream that people are talking about it. And I found that very encouraging.
I like you, Melissa, because I also very much have that viewpoint. It's like going to just like a regular doctor for like a physical every 3-6 months, because you just need to check up on yourself. Like your mind is just as important as your liver or your kidney.
Well, and the thing we don't realize, and this goes back to the initial part of the interview with the autoimmune disease, I did not realize the how intrinsically linked the mind and the body are, how if you neglect one, the other's going to go. So I neglected my mind for years, and eventually it caught up with me. And autoimmune disease is when your body starts attacking itself. Well, my thoughts had been attacking myself for decades. So it only makes sense that that's going to happen. Now, you could have the best thoughts in your head, but be treating your body like shit. And then eventually your mental health is going to suffer, because you cannot separate the mind and body. You just can't. That's why I like functional medicine. We are an ecosystem, and we have to treat every part of ourselves spiritually, physically, emotionally, in order to be optimally functioning human beings.
Agreed. You know, it's everything's connected. You know, the knee bone's connected to the eyeball bone, as they say.
That's how it goes.
Right, Sam? How long has it been since you switched gears from being in entertainment to being a mindfulness coach?
So I left Los Angeles 5 years ago, and I was at KLOS in Los Angeles doing radio full time, became very sick. I started doing radio part time in Miami. I was so sick that my heart wasn't really in it as much anymore. I had brain fog, I had pain, I had chronic fatigue. So I was still doing it, but it just, once upon a time, that was all I ever focused on. Suddenly I had to start focusing on myself. And then COVID happened, and myself and 95% of my coworkers were let go and never rehired. The radio industry has completely changed. There's a very small number of people still working in radio nowadays. So I had already been sort of organically been studying mindfulness and the mind-body connection to use on myself as a communicator and a broadcaster and someone who takes big ideas and whittles them down. I kind of found it natural to go, it sounds odd, but talking about Motley Crue in 30 seconds, it just sort of was a natural segue for me to want to talk about things like neural pathways and I'll do the heavy lifting, I'll read the books, and I'll sort of whittle it down into bite-sized information to share with other people.
I think it's an interesting transition, because on the surface, it doesn't seem like it really would be related, but most of the time when we talk about music or we talk about the artists that we enjoy, that we connect with, there is always this underlying psychological and emotional connection, and an awareness of oh, I like this song because of this. I like this band, or I like this artist because I can relate to X, Y, and Z. And the practice of mindfulness is just being aware of all that for yourself in the moment. And I totally see how it would naturally just go from one to the other. And just seeing, talking with you now in person, you have so much energy that you want to be able to connect with people. So I see you going from being, an entertainment personality to doing this as a natural shift, and you're giving back and you're helping people, find a pathway out of the darkness.
It feels super exciting for me. I remember when I started thinking about wanting to do, I still don't know, I wrote a couple of books and I have coaching clients, but I do at some point want to take this into broadcasting, whether it be TV or I still don't know. I'm sort of hoping the universe will put all the pieces in place on that. But, someone said to me, but, you have tattoos, you don't look like a therapist. And I said, well, that's exactly the point. And people were like, well, who's going to take you seriously talking about mental health? And I'm like, because I lived it. If I can come through this with knowledge and some optimism and excitement even, then I think I'll resonate with people, because I wish I had someone telling me this stuff when I was coming up in a way that I could understand and someone I could relate to, rather than just oh, here's a grown up and rolling my,
it's someone you just feel comfortable being around. And that's something else that I think is important to realize, is that in the process of understanding yourself through practicing mindfulness, you have to realize that everybody is different. Everyone's an individual. So having one type of therapist, one type of personality to treat everyone just doesn't make sense, like numbers wise. And I was actually, I interviewed a therapist a few episodes ago for the show. And that was a point that she brought up, is the fact that like when she was younger, she also faced that same stigma where she didn't feel comfortable opening up to people. She didn't feel comfortable talking to someone. But what helped her eventually open up to the therapist that she ended up speaking to was that the person that she went through almost exactly the same thing that she was struggling with. So she felt like she was able to relate and open up and like talk to them, and they would know what she was going through.
I think what's interesting too, I historically as a broadcaster was an interviewer, and some of the most impactful conversations I've had with people have been about real deal stuff. I spoke to Duff McKagan for over an hour, and he had, besides his drug and alcohol use, there was a suicide attempt, and he is just a rebounder. But here's a guy I idolized when I was a kid, and he had this conversation with me, and no embarrassment, no, just here, this is me. If you're going to be a fan, then you have to know all about me. And then that was inspiring to me. Yeah, let's talk about this shit. Like, we're all in this together. Life is messy. We're all messy, but that makes us all beautiful too. And we need to get it out there. We just need to have these conversations.
Agreed. The more we have these kinds of conversations, I feel like obviously it's going to destigmatize it, because it's going to become more and more common. So we're not going to be talking about mental health. We're just going to be talking, and like, this is what's going to come up.
I love that.
Like,
we're not going to be talking about mental health. We're just going to be talking. We're going to be really talking. We're going to not have the bullshit filter on. We're just going to be having conversations about real things.
And I think a hurdle that people have, again, just talking from personal experience and like what I felt, is that like there's a sense of being a burden if one does open up and say, hey, I'm having a rough time. And it took a while for me to really learn the whole like no man an island thing. So like we can't go through life alone. And we can't go through life alone because it is physically impossible. So the idea of holding on to our own emotions and not sharing with our loved ones what we're going through, I think is just like it's very detrimental in general. Which, my question to you, did you feel that prior to you like going down this path to becoming a mindfulness coach, and kind of like realizing what was going on and like making that lifestyle change, did you ever have an issue opening up to your family, friends, or loved ones?
Well, this is sort of the cautionary tale, because opening up can be a dual-edged sword. When I was a kid and tried to open up, it was a very different time, but it was, don't feel sorry for yourself, stop complaining, you see yourself as a victim. So that sort of, if you're a depressed or anxious person with low self-esteem, that sort of compounds itself and makes you not want to share with other people. And then as I got older and I was very, very depressed, I want to say this carefully. Sometimes we feel like we are a burden, but you have to pick the right people to share with. I felt like I was sinking and I was dumping on everyone. And truthfully, I was a burden to many people. It was too much. They didn't have the tools. I was sucking out the energy. So, well, yes, sharing and asking for help is absolutely necessary and mandatory. We have to be careful who we ask it from and what to expect. So that it doesn't, if we don't get it, it doesn't compound our own feeling of insecurity and lack of worth and isolation.
How is it that you felt that you were able to navigate uh, the right people to open up to?
I don't know that I was. I was
Interesting.
able to. I was able to navigate well. The right people were authors and thinkers and talkers and the internet. And in my real life, I have been to every type of therapy you in the world. I mean, I was a depressed little kid, so for my whole life, I've been into every type of therapy. Like the electrode therapy and
Oh, wow.
ketamine therapy. I mean, I have done, and nothing was, and medicines and acupuncture. And for me, I found my people through books. And then the turning point for me was seeing a holistic functional doctor who made me realize I am the right person. So I had to listen to myself. I had to take care of myself. I had to be kind to myself. And I had to take back my personal power and start making choices, because no one else was going to fix me. It was kind of my job to do it.
That's
Not that I was broken.
but
There's
there's
that.
yeah, yeah, but I think that's really a fascinating point that you're bringing up, is the fact that you're saying you basically went through therapy most of your life, and you opened up to people. You weren't really holding back, but you still were not finding that balance that you so needed until you got to a certain point. Am I getting that correctly?
Well, you know what? I think therapy was hugely okay. When I first started in therapy, I think I was in college.
Mhm.
And I would be stuck on one thing. And it was a very good therapist. And she said, listen, she's like, we're not getting to the root of the problem. You're just obsessing on this one thing. So at that point, I got a medication and was able to uncover trauma and certain things, which was hugely impactful.
Mhm.
But then for the next decade or two, I would still go to therapy and we would just talk over and over and over and over again about the trauma. And at this point, it was, looking back for me personally, reinforcing the victimology, the victim story. It was sort of defining, oh, I am my history. And that's what I like about coaching or other types of therapy, where it's like, okay, all this psychotherapy is great for a certain amount of time. Let's figure out why you are the way you are. Now that we got that settled, now let's figure out how we take that information and give you the tools to move forward. I'm not sure if I answered your question, but somewhere in there was an answer.
No, you definitely did. And just, I think the knowledge and the research that's being done in the last 5, 10, 15 years for mental health and like psychology in general has been growing leaps and bounds, especially with things, like over like borderline personality disorder, which can, be pretty chaotic. The idea that, like, again, like you said, you have to identify, okay, this is what's going on. But then like after you identify what the problem is, it's like, if you're working on a car, it's like, oh, the alternator's what's giving me an issue. You can't just stare at the alternator.
Yeah.
we gotta fix
Now
the problem.
Yes.
How do we go forward? But it's exactly like that. And I feel like it's also a good practice in general to switch therapists from time to time as you need, as is needed, because as an individual, as a person, you're going to grow, you're going to learn things, you're going to evolve. Who you are now is not who you were when you were 10 years old. And like your life experiences change, and being able to find people that you connect with, that you're able to learn from and be guided from, is going to change over time as well. So when you felt like you were in that rut, did you take time off from those therapists, or did you just kind of like jump from like person to person? Or
There was time in between. The key element that was missing was, I didn't realize I played a role in all this. I didn't realize I could change my way of thinking. I didn't realize that the way I had historically been thinking all of my life did not have to be a life sentence. there was no pivotal point at that, because I didn't, it was like, okay, I have all this, as we said, now what? And I didn't know that the now what was the most important question, which was, okay, now
What?
we stop being on autopilot. Now we be mindful, and now we accept, yes, that was my history. Yeah, that history sucked. Do I like it? No. Me resisting it is hitting my head against a wall. So I accept it. It is what it is. That's what mindfulness is, allowing life to be what it is on its terms, while simultaneously taking control of the things that we can control. So no, I can't control my past. I can control how I look at my past, and I can control what I do moving forward.
What was that one like aha moment that made you like see things differently?
There wasn't one moment. It really was getting sick and going to all the top endocrinologists in Los Angeles, who were giving me different medications for different parts of my bodies without a proper diagnosis. I was having anxiety, so they gave me anxiety medicine. I was having pain, so they gave me painkillers. I was having insomnia, so they were giving me sleeping medication. My heart was racing, so they were giving me beta blockers. And I was like, there is something, I've been depressed in my life before. This is not, there is something going on. And each doctor, each specialist would see me for 10 minutes, hand me a prescription, send me on my way. And when I got to Florida, I went to my first functional doctor, who has become a very good friend of mine. And, we sat down for 2 hours, and basically she was like, you need to do a whole life overhaul, no more caffeine, cigarettes, beer, no more staying up till 5 o'clock in the morning, going to the rock show. And I was like, no, I can't do all that now. So she was like, all right, we're going to start small. We're going to do one thing. So we picked one thing to do, which was once a week, you're going to take a walk on the beach. Then I started feeling pretty good. So then it was like, okay, now let's add something else. All right, I'm not going to have the caffeine. I'm just going to start drinking water. Ooh, that feels pretty good. So once you start taking little self-care steps, you start feeling a little powerful.
Little
and
baby
then
steps.
Little tiny micro steps. It just naturally progresses. And then there's a snowball effect. And then you wind up being like me, who just wants to shout from the rooftops, like, you have the power. You can help yourself.
That's really important too. Cause like, especially if you're someone who like battles with anxiety, the idea of like, oh, I have this giant to-do list, like, it can seem a little more overwhelming, but if you take it one step at a time, it seems a lot more digestible and like manageable. So like that is like a perfect lesson. And I'm glad to see that like that approach really helped you. Cause like talking to you now, you're like a ray of sunshine. Like, I feel like there's so much energy. There's so much energy coming off of you. Like, I feel like we're physically in the same room.
Okay, but I do want, I want to make this clear too. I'm not always happy. Like, I am still dealing with the loss of my brother 2 years ago. My parents are getting older. I'm in a new city. I haven't really had time to make friends here because of COVID. I'm redefining myself career-wise. Now, it sounds like I'm giving a whole complaint list. I want you to know that I definitely get down. I'm not always, but
you're a human being, and that's just
right.
part of
and
life.
That's part of mindfulness too. Is at first, when I would get depressed, I'd sort of beat myself up for being depressed. So that would just make it grow exponentially. Now it's when I'm down or I'm scared, I let myself acknowledge that. I let myself feel it. And then it sort of passes through me instead of me getting stuck in that state. So yeah, it's, I'm definitely more resilient and more positive than I've ever been in my life. I was going to say, despite what's happened in the last few years, but actually maybe because of what's happened in the last few years.
Well, I'm very glad to see that you've taken, the events of the past few years and basically used them as a tool to keep moving forward and find that strength that you have within yourself. Again, it's a lot of heavy stuff that you've dealt with on top of, a worldwide pandemic. So
yeah,
it's like you said, like
real.
You're going to have, ups, you're going to have downs. But I think a really important thing that you pointed out is the fact that like you don't shame yourself for feeling those downs. You let those feelings come and exist and be, and you just, let them wash over you basically. Because again, we're human beings. We have emotions, and we have ups, we have downs, we have things in the middle. And none of those emotions are invalid. They're not good. They're not bad. They are. It's how we react and process the world around us.
And I think what's important about what you and I are doing, bringing this message out on social media, is as aware as younger kids have become about mental health, they are bombarded everywhere they look on social media with perfect looking people having perfect lives and always being happy. And it's just not true. So the pressure they must feel has got to be enormous. I thank goodness I didn't have the internet back in the old days when I was growing up. I mean, I can't even, I don't even know what I'd be like. I've huddled and rocking back and forth, and if I had grown up with that. So I just think it's important to remind, as you're scrolling, it's important to say to yourself, be mindful. Be mindful of how often you use social media. Be mindful that everything you're looking at is carefully curated and not real. Everything you do, you have the choice to be mindful about. Everything you eat, everything you think, everything you look at, everything you let invade your psyche, you have a choice. And I think that's the biggest, most empowering lesson that I've learned.
That is a very good lesson. And Melissa,
so
thank you so much for taking the time to chat today. I very, very much appreciate you just sharing, what you've gone through and, your perspective on life.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Again, keep up the good fight. I love what you're doing, and keep doing it.
I will do it, and you do the same thing. And as a sign off, I truly believe that the more that we as a society feel comfortable opening up about our struggles, the more it will help others to realize that they are not alone. Everyone has the inner strength to face whatever life puts along their path. So thank you again, Melissa, for taking the time to chat, and thank you to everyone that has tuned into this episode. If anyone watching finds that they are struggling with their mental health, please do not be afraid to reach out to your friends, family, or a mental health professional. I'll place a link in the description of this video that will have some information and connection to further resources. And until next time, remember, you always have the strength to conquer your battlefield.